What's going on, everybody? This is Intellect, and welcome back to the channel. Stan Van Gundy's elite commentary during the NBA restart sparked the idea of this video, defending the pick and roll. He often mentioned or alluded to drop coverage, which for a lot of people is a foreign term, even if you're a big basketball fan. The modern NBA is guard-oriented, and the pick and roll is one of the most effective and by far the most used set in the league, so guarding it is really tough. In this video, we'll go over the pros and cons of the most common pick and roll coverages to hopefully give you a better understanding of what you're seeing on the court and give you some insight for the next time you coach or play, whenever we can all get back to hooping. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now, the first thing I wanted to go over in defending the pick and roll is going under or over screens. No matter what coverage you're in, knowing your personnel and being able to stay in a respectable defensive position despite the screen might be the most important piece. Fighting over the screen is the default way to defend. Unless you're guarding a player like Ben Simmons, Celtics Rondo, or anybody who's more effective getting downhill, you'll fight over the top of the screen. This calls for throwing your inside leg, the closest one to the screen, and getting skinny. Getting skinny is a term that refers to avoiding the screens by dipping your shoulder, evading, and making yourself less screenable in general, which allows you to better contest and stay in front of the ball handler. In addition to this, closing the gap and applying pressure to the ball handler makes it much tougher to get screened and allows you to stay attached to your man. Now, the way Rondo jumped out here makes me think he might have been trying to get into ice, but was a little late. But watch how he closes the gap when he's aware of the screen. Just textbook. Now here guarding Jamal Crawford, Marcus Smart goes under the first screen because it's DeAndre Jordan, and knowing if he goes over, Jamal gets right into that pull-up midi that he wants. He goes over the second time with the Lennox help and the guy guarding Blake tagging DJ's roll. Side P&R, Dame goes under against one of the game's greatest mid-range scorers ever. He probably should have closed the gap and followed him over, but Rolo was already in no man's land anyways. Let us move on to the first coverage, the switch. Now, the switch is probably the most basic coverage that there is, but it's also the most complicated to execute. Being able to switch at a high level requires you to have a ton of multi-positional defenders and a high level of communication and concentration. The technique and goal of almost all the other coverages is so much different that if you're interchanging or switching between the coverages based on personnel or just to give them a different look, you could get burnt if a player isn't locked in or forgets a possession, especially in higher levels of basketball. Now, we know what the Warriors could do offensively, but defensively, they were all-time great, largely due to their ability to switch and high levels of communication. Watch as Danny Green tries to create an advantage for LaMarcus with the seamless switch from Klay to Draymond, but Dedmon is in the area and JaVale communicates it to Klay. He takes LaMarcus and Klay follows Dedmon out of the play. It's something that you can only do with communication. Side P&R, Klay ices Patty Mills, quickly denies Powell's diving lane. Patty comes back up and Klay and Dre switch once again while Zaza tags Powell until he can get back into position. Having guys like Klay and Draymond is a huge luxury. Every team can't pull off switches this smoothly and easily. I believe they are on ice here again. KD gets a little out of position. Draymond cuts Simmons off, who isn't a real scoring threat, and then KD just takes Aldridge. Again, switching at the highest levels is heavily reliant on personnel. You're not going to be able to put together the Warriors roster, but you better be able to keep up with everyone. That second LeBron Cavs stint heavily exposed those trying to switch, always looking for an advantage. LeBron had a Zealy on him here. He could have drove, but he felt the space from his lack of foot speed and went ahead and pulled up. And he's loved pulling up on bigs as he's gotten older, so Zealy's really at a disadvantage. And we're all familiar with this switch. Steph primarily guarded JR in those finals, and thus JR set a ton of screens. They wanted to get Steph on that island with Kyrie. JR holds a screen long enough for Steph to have to stay, and the rest is history. Beating switches comes down to exposing matchups and just getting buckets in general. What used to be an automatic post-up has turned into an isolation or quick attack in most NBA offenses. Now the next coverage we'll talk about is drop coverage. Drop coverage is when the person guarding the screener drops back in an attempt to contain both the ball handler and the screener who is rolling to the basket. It's often used by bigs who don't have the mobility to frequently get out on the perimeter, and it's effective in shutting down roll options at the basket and protecting the rim in general. But it can also be a death wish when you're playing against guys like Steph, Dame, Trae Young, and really most of the best guards at shooting threes off the dribble. You're basically relying on your guard defender to fight through the screen and contest, which may easily be flipped if he gets through one or even two times, and hoping the opposing guard doesn't hit the shot. Personally, I hate drop or down coverage and would do any and everything to have a roster that isn't forced to run it. But those who do must have elite defensive guards who can recover well and a team that's on a string defensively. And you really got to be playing a team that doesn't have one of those elite scorers off the dribble. Raptors are in drop here. D-Rose comes off the screen. Pat McCaw is a little out of position, but Van Vliet's help defense completely changes this play. Boucher does an okay job denying the lob, but Fred's pressure makes D-Rose gather the ball before he wants to. In Boston, you've got Avery Bradley and Kelly Olynyk in drop. I don't know who number 30 is, and clearly neither does Brandon Knight. AB does a tremendous job of getting back into the play while Olynyk drops long enough and maintains good positioning for Bradley to get back and contest. At the end of the day, you might only be able to contest from behind. Here we have Bogut and Steph versus Rubio and Pekovic. Bogut is all the way in the paint, and you'll level Rubio pull-ups. Steph does a great job of staying attached, especially off of Pekovic's screen, and he bothers Rubio's jumper. A better way to teach the drop may be to look at it at its worst. There's a double drag here for Luka. Giannis is on KP and Lopez is on Finney-Smith, and this is not what you want to do at all. Luka has about 5 years to take a three, a pull-up, whatever he really wants. He has his pick of the litter because Giannis did nothing on the initial screen, and Lopez is way deep in the paint. The best way to beat drop is with a slip or a pop, and Finney-Smith is more open than a Walgreens. This is simply bad defense, especially if Lopez is going to fall for that fake when he's already 30 feet away from Finney-Smith. He's got to just protect the rim at that point. Now watch this bad defense exhibition that was put on by the Sixers the other day. This one is really self-explanatory.
When you see a 5-man in drop coverage, are you saying to yourself, dead meat? Like, I've got an easy pull-up three?
Absolutely.
Some teams have sold out so much on having the 5 just drop all the way into the paint and protect the rim, right? When you have someone who can operate in the pick and roll like that, it's really almost impossible to defend.
Up next is the hedge. The hedge is probably the most effective coverage there is. The hedge is when the screener man jumps out and impedes the motion of the ball handler, forcing him a direction that he doesn't want to go, while giving time to the defender guarding the ball handler to recover back to his man. This forces the ball handler to go at least one dribble away from the basket before the big or the screener defender returns back to his man. There are a couple different variations of the hedge as well. A soft hedge occurs when the defender doesn't fully turn his body or just maintains defensive positioning in front of the ball handler. A hard hedge, however, can extend out multiple feet and dribbles and almost look like a switch depending on the situation. KG was a master of the hard hedge. He perfectly times the hedge here and makes Steve Blake go in a different direction, allowing time for each one more to recover, while simultaneously keeping his head on a swivel and denying Murphy the ball. Murphy screens again, KG hedges, keeps Blake from going downhill, Ray Allen tags Murphy on the short roll, and you have beautiful defense. Here JR comes through with a screen trying to get a switch, Steph hedges and makes Kyrie retreat dribble, and Klay provides great ball pressure to prevent a pass to JR. Draymond is also in great help position if JR were to short roll, and knowing his personnel, he knows that Kyrie probably isn't going to see LeBron open across the court, so he can cheat over a little bit more. Here's an example that isn't perfect, but it works. Caleb is a bit late on the hedge, but he doesn't allow Steph to turn the corner. LeBron steps up to help, forcing Steph to pick up his dribble. Tristan tags Bergeron and leaves Iggy in the corner, who shot just 30% from 3 in the series, and Kyrie plays free safety. Again, it's not perfect. Kyrie probably could have just told Caleb to switch and ran to Iguodala in the corner, but it's Game 7 in the finals, and you get it how you can. A bad example I saw the other day, Korkmaz comes through with one of the worst hedges I've ever seen, especially from a guard. While J-Rich gets caught up, there's a miscommunication because at this point, J-Rich should have just went ahead and taken CJ. This is just bad execution and poor communication early in this game.
Gets it from CJ. Dame turns the corner. Thought about a three, but CJ with a wide open look.
The best way to beat a hedge is with a split or a slip, and if the defense hedges without backside help or on an empty side, you can easily score if you have a patient ball handler. Now closely related to the hedge is the blitz or the trap. Blitzing or trapping the pick and roll is used to force the ball out of the ball handler's hands. This is often used against dominant guards and those who can stretch the floor at an elite level. Guys like James Harden, Damian Lillard, Steph Curry, and even Trae Young see this a ton. The Miami Heat used to trap ball screens all the time. They had the personnel to feel safe on the backside, and at this point of the NBA, people weren't shooting threes at an ungodly rate like they are now, making it safer to do. You can beat the blitz or a trap with a short roll if the ball pressure isn't on par, or you just have a talented passer handling the ball. From there, it basically becomes 3-on-2, and you always like those odds.
The Blazers have gone nearly 3 minutes without a point. They trail by 1. Nurkic against Patterson. Turns.
The last one we'll go over today is ice or push. Ice is one of the more popular basketball terminology sayings made famous by Tom Thibodeau and Doc Rivers in that Big 3 Celtics run, and later on in Tibbs' runs with those Bulls teams. The ice coverage is used when the on-ball defender forces the ball handler to one side in an attempt to contain the ball handler by disallowing the screen and using the big as help at the rim. This is done by jumping up high on the screen, which forces the ball handler to go towards the sideline and the baseline. This makes it tougher on guards whose games are predicated on penetration and high-level jump shooting. Push is essentially the same concept, but it's used when the ball is in the middle of the floor, forcing the ball handler to one side that is essentially based on tendencies and abilities going in a certain direction. Now let's look at ice in more detail. Here Klay jumps up and doesn't allow Patty Mills to use the screen, forcing him into traffic, and he's forced to pass it out to LaMarcus. Next we've got Jimmy and the Bulls. Watch how when he sees D-Will going to use Lopez's screen, he dead sprints to cut him off, and that is the basic philosophy behind ice. From here, Belly slightly comes off of Joe Johnson to create the illusion of help. Noah gets back into play to play both the help to D-Will's drive and stop Lopez from diving. Lopez couldn't shoot at this point, so he's a much easier cover as well. The Wiz are deep in the corner here. It's good initial defense by Pressey, but Gortat re-screens and he falls behind, and Olynyk was sort of in no man's land and leaves Wall open for the pull-up. Olynyk has got to be able to read the re-screen ahead of time. Wes Matthews does a good job on the initial force, but Duncan re-screens him, or what some NBA circles call twist, and Rolo was just too low to bother Tony Parker from hitting his money shot. Running ice, you must stay attached if they attempt to re-screen, because unless you have a mobile big or one that's at least seeing the play develop, you're going to be toast like the Pacers were here. It's good positioning by Lance initially. He doesn't close the gap or get around the Dwight screen. Parsons snakes it, forces Hibbert to come up, and he throws the perfect lob to Dwight. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you out in one way or another. Let me know if you want to see a different part of the game broken down. As always, if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more basketball content, and comment down below what you thought of the video. It's Hoop Intellect, I'm Keandre, and I'm out.
And you know you better.